Minister Ross.
Thank you very much indeed, Ceann Comhairle. And I wish to move the Government's counter-motion on promoting cycling. First of all, I want to applaud what's come from the other side of the House. On the whole, I think we're in agreement with virtually everything that you've said. We're pursuing the same goals. We can't agree the motion because it condemns the Government, and we believe that what we're doing is a very full commitment to cycling in the future. And I want to make first of all a concession and say that in the past there has been inadequate support for the cycling community, and we have indeed fallen behind the standards and the ambitions that we should have lived up to. That, though, is in the past. And I now want to outline, as indeed all the speakers have asked me to do, and I apologise to Deputy Moynihan, I was just looking something up to answer one of your questions, but I want to respond by saying what we are doing and what we're going to do. And the commitments which we are solemnly keeping already and ones which we intend to do in the future. And I hope that the Fianna Fáil Party and the Green Party have an amendment down, I think, well, they're not here, but that the Green Party, the Labour Party, will join with the Government in pursuing these goals which are genuinely felt. We may be, or I may be, a late convert, but certainly coming to this job, as Deputy Troy acknowledged, I've said yes, that commitment is there. Cycling is the future, and we have to, as a government, support it because it's part of our policy to get people out of their cars. It's the main thrust of transport policy, and nobody will be, I think, will yield to members of the government in their commitment to safety on the roads. So let's join together on that and try not to be too abrasive about what we say about this issue, which is serious and to which we've given a lot of commitment. So there are clear elements of Fianna Fáil's motion and amendments that are acceptable. The Labour Party's proposed amendment is perfectly acceptable. I'm afraid it fails to acknowledge that the Design Manual for Urban Roads and Streets does precisely what their amendment proposes, but it's an amendment to a motion. I'm unable to accept the motion, the main motion, because it condemns the Government, but I accept that the Labour Party is in accord with government ambitions as well. While the Green Party's amendment that alleges a failure of government to implement policy is clearly something I cannot accept. And I do regret the fact that the Green Party isn't here. But let's be honest, this motion isn't about starting a real debate on cycling. Instead, it's being used sometimes as an opportunity to grandstand. And any real consideration of the motion would confirm that, in my view. The motion calls on government to prioritise the rollout of segregated cycle lanes, which of course is being done, as anticipated, by Deputy Troy, by the Bus Connects programme, by the Greenway strategy, and other programmes funded both by my department and the Government's Urban and Rural Regeneration and Development Funds. It calls on government to establish a division within my department that has existed for some time. It seemingly calls on the government to shortcut planning and procurement and just build 2 cycling projects in advance of the VeloCity conference next year. I could go on, but I won't. Instead, as I think the other speakers have asked me to do, I propose to take stock on what has been achieved, look at what can be improved, and try and seek consensus as to how we can build upon the very welcome increases we are seeing in the numbers of people cycling across the country. They're not enough, but they're certainly on the increase. And first of all, let me say that National Cycle Policy Framework, as published by then Minister Noel Dempsey, was a significant and welcome development under Fianna Fáil. I applaud you for what you did for cycling in the past. As he stated in his introduction to the framework, no single action will prompt people to cycle. Words I think we should all reflect on, particularly those who've given their name to Fianna Fáil's motion. Of course, the economic and financial crisis meant that among the 19 objectives and 109 actions in the framework, priority had to be given to those that were possible from within the much reduced financial resources available at that time and the years that followed. but progress has been made and should be recognised. In terms of planning and design, for example, the NTA published its cycle manual in 2011, while in 2013 the design manual for urban streets and roads was published. Development of both was a key recommendation of the framework. In more rural areas, I think all members of the House will acknowledge the wonderful amenities that have been created in different parts of the country through the development of greenways, which I think was absent in all the speeches that we've had so far. That's why I was delighted to launch the new Greenway strategy with Minister Griffin this summer. In launching that strategy, I also ensured we had the funding framework in place to back up its delivery. The funding I secured provides the link between ambition and delivery, and I look forward to the announcement of successful projects next year. The cycling safety programme provided training for about 20,000 primary school children this year, and thanks to the additional money I've secured in the budget, will expand again next year. This is in line with the ambitions contained within the National Cycling Policy Framework, but which, due to these funding constraints I've already mentioned, wasn't implemented back in 2009. Safety is critically important, and I know we can all agree that any loss of life is a tragedy. Last year, there was unfortunately an increase in the number of cyclists who lost their lives on the roads. Since 2000, the average number of cyclist kills on the roads has been 10 per annum, but last year it was 15, the highest since 2007. Numbers this year show a decrease, but I know there is no cause for complacency. As you are aware, the issue of road safety and how to improve it is something that I'm personally committed to since becoming Minister. In 2016, I secured Oireachtas approval of the Road Safety Act 2016, which made provision for a new 20 km/h speed limit, in addition to the 30 km and 40 km limits already available to local authorities. My department's guidelines for setting and managing speed limits encourages local authorities to use reduced speed limits in residential areas, and many are expanding the areas covered by these special speed limits. Obviously, another topical legislative issue is the proposed minimum passing distance. And I applaud the efforts that have been made and the consistency of Phil Skelton in this regard, with whom I've had a very close working relationship in the past. In terms of the legislation, you're aware, Deputy Troy, that the Office of the Attorney General raised issues with the initial proposed legislation. I can't ignore those. I can't just tell the Attorney General that we're going to introduce the legislation willy-nilly, and I wasn't going to do that. So instead, my officials developed an alternative solution in consultation with the Office of the AG and the Garda Síochána. There are a number of administrative supports that need to be put in place, and the department is reliant on outside stakeholders to deliver these. Once these supports are set up, the legislation will be commenced without further delay. On other safety measures, just a few weeks ago, I announced an additional 400,000 in funding for Dublin City Council to allow the Council to install cycling safety technology on 40 of the busiest junctions across the city. I think this has great potential and look forward to hearing about its impact once rolled out. Of course, any discussion of cycling must consider the issues of funding and infrastructure. On the issue of funding, deputies seem unwilling or unable to accept that funding for cycling is increasing. I've quoted these figures before, but I'm going to do it again, given their significance. Over the period 2018 to 2021, and please listen to this, deputies, we will provide around €750 million to Bus Connects Dublin, which will deliver 200 kilometres of largely segregated cycle lanes. 110 million through a dedicated cycling and walking infrastructure funding programme. 135 million to the Sustainable Urban Transport Programme, which funds the delivery of traffic management and smarter travel projects. 53 million from 2019 to support the Greenway strategy. We've also funded public bike schemes in Dublin, Cork, Limerick and Galway. And we funded their expansion too, with new stations opening in Cork and Dublin this year, and more planned for Galway, while work is well underway to extend the scheme to include Waterford too. Let's be clear. This collective level of funding is unprecedented and will make a real and lasting difference to cycling across the state. But there are those in the House who refuse to acknowledge that. I said at the outset of our discussion that I wanted a real debate, and in that spirit, I'll obviously acknowledge that despite the improvements that have happened, we still have a long way to go. Multi-annual infrastructure projects and programmes don't always flow seamlessly. There are a range of issues which impact on delivery, and I don't mean money. I mean things like organisational capacity, design, planning, and environmental considerations. And yes, in recent years, we haven't built as much of the infrastructure that we wanted to see delivered. I admit that, but the future is bright for cycling, Deputy Troy. The present is bright, and the commitments are there in the delivered speech which I've made.
Thank you very much, Minister.